Hey, hello, howdy, how you doing? Have you ever thought to yourself, I love Kenshi, but I wish I could somehow make the game even more difficult? Oh boy, do I have something for you. See, around a year ago, I made a series turned supercut showcasing Cloud in the Sky's Impossible Start mod, where you start off as a measly torso, 1 billion cats in debt, and hated by every faction in the game. The 2-hour supercut follows Girth's journey as he escapes from the cannibal plains, borrows some limbs from a nearby shop, survives the elements, and eventually starts a community of outcasts to lead to salvation. There was only one real point of criticism that stood out through all of that. He was a skeleton, and by default, that's easier than being a human, as skeletons are not targeted by cannibals and don't need to eat. Now, that's certainly true, and after receiving thousands of comments across all 5 episodes and the supercut, I made a goal to revisit the Impossible Start challenge, but as a human. This came with its own problems though, mainly due to the starting location. See, in this mod, you spawn in the direct center of a group of cannibals in their camp. As a result, they immediately pick you up and toss you in a cage. Normally, not a death sentence. Unless you don't have any limbs, meaning you can't pick the lock. At first, I tried brute forcing this and save scumming to slowly ragdoll my soft shitty body out of the way, but nothing seemed to be working. This start truly seemed to be impossible with any race outside of a skeleton. But then I thought to myself, why not just move the starting location? Which led me on a journey of mod creation and creating my first custom start in Kenshi. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the TGP Impossible Human Start mod. It has the exact same parameters of the mod created by Clouds in the Sky. You still start limbless, 1 billion cats in debt, and hated by every major and minor faction in the game. But this time, instead of being spawned inside a sea of cannibals who immediately capture you, you'll spawn in an abandoned town in cannibal country. This way, you'll still have to trek through the cannibal plains as a measly torso. We'll still have to go through the vast pain and suffering of surviving the elements, finding limbs, finding food, leveling up, and completing the challenge. The only difference is that you can now actually try the challenge instead of instantaneously being placed in a cage that you can't escape from. As my one plug for the video, the first 8 days or so of this playthrough were all streamed right here on YouTube. So if that's something you're interested in watching, the full unedited VOD can be found in the top right corner of your screen as well as down in the description. Meet Shaft, the protagonist of our story and not so distant cousin to Girth, Kenshi's most feared yet lovable robot. You're probably wondering how our boy Shaft ended up in this predicament. Well, allow me to explain. Much like any other man in their 20s and 30s, Shaft has become enamored by the activity known as sports betting. After taking out a series of small loans from every major faction and minor camp of citizens throughout the lands, and dumping it on one of Big Cat's can't-lose parlays, he found himself in immense debt, as the parlay did, in fact, lose. Left with this enormous debt, it was decided via council decision that he would be stripped of his limbs and left for dead in the hellhole known as the Cannibal Plains. Surely he would either die from the elements, die from starvation, or, hopefully worse, be eaten alive by cannibals. Oh, how wrong they were. We begin our journey with a young Shaft being buried in the sand, or rather, a torso by the name of Shaft being buried in the desert sand. Since the town is vacant, I took a few minutes to loot one of the buildings and gather some supplies for the journey ahead. Just, don't ask where he's storing all that bread and dried meat. The plan initially was to make my way down into the floodlands and begin searching for any robotic limbs in the ruins. If we're gonna survive out here though, we've gotta get our stealth up. We're still in the heart of the Cannibal Plains after all, and all it takes is one rogue patrol to walk by us and we're done for. I found the best way to level stealth early is to take advantage of these roads. Whenever a random traveler passes by, we'll skyrocket in levels. That's only amplified when a patrol passes through, even if it's something like a simple group of river raptors. It's also a constant supply of dopamine watching your levels shoot up, which helps counteract the monotony of watching a small torso crawl through dirt. By the end of the first day, Shaft's sneaking level was already in the high 50s. A good start, but we could do better. It wasn't all bad though. Sure, we were inching our way through the wasteland, but sometimes you could even happen across miracles, like floating bodies. Nature is a wonderful thing. If that wasn't good enough for you, there's also a chance you'll catch groups of bandits and cannibals tearing each other apart. Like in this instance, a group of shrieking bandits, also known as chihuahuas, picked a fight with a tribe of scrawny cannibals. Unfortunately for them though, they were severely outnumbered. But when all hope seemed lost, we had a true Lord of the Rings moment. Out of nowhere, a wild pack of goats rushed into the battle, wiping out the cannibal fighters and saving the shrieking bandits from certain death. And if there was ever one moment to sum up Kenshi, it's gotta be that. A group of naked, shrieking bandits fighting scrawny cannibals, being saved by a pack of wild goats, all while a torso named Shaft scooted his way around the fight in the background. By day 3, I decided to change course and head to World's End in search of limbs. This seemed like a much safer bet. Not only did I not have to deal with mechanical spiders who have the capability to one-shot Shaft, but there's also a guarantee that we'll get robotic limbs in World's End considering they have a shop there. A lot less luck is needed when there's a 100% chance a place will have some of the items you need to survive. Normally, food should have been a major issue by this point, but I'd gotten lucky. A group of cannibals had picked a fight with some wandering nomads who had just completely rolled through them. But during the fight, the cannibals were able to kill several bone dogs traveling with the nomads. So I simply waited for the fight to wrap up, then ragdolled my way over to the aftermath where I looted several cannibals for medical supplies before butchering the fallen bone dogs and cooking the meat. This should give me more than enough food to make it to World's End and get some limbs. Now all that was left to do was simply use the crimson chin of Shaft to climb the mountain, sneak past the guards, find some limbs, and superglue them to Shaft's nubs. Honestly, the climb was the easy part. It even created some really cool shots, at least in my opinion. When it came to getting through the front gate, I climbed up the right side of the railing and slithered my way past the 5 guards positioned out front. Canonically, they didn't see Shaft and he was able to sneak through, but personally, I like to imagine that they saw this little torso trying his best to be sneaky and went, "What the fuck is this guy doing? Where are his limbs?" And then they just kinda let him pass through. Having successfully made it into World's End, I spent most of the night crawling behind all of the buildings to reach the robotic shop. It's important to remember that every single faction in the game would like nothing more than to bury Shaft. The -100 relations applies to all major and minor factions, so it's quite literally on site for this man, which is why stealth is so important early on. It took about 6 in-game hours, but I finally managed to enter the shop, where I found a bowl on a table and immediately began picking it up, dropping it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. This is the safest way to level thievery in Kenshi, though it's also the most boring. Why am I doing this? Well, I just explained that everyone hates Shaft and wants to kill him on sight. Pay attention. Anyway, this levels my thievery skill, which gives me a higher percentage chance to steal items without being caught. Things like robotic limbs, which is exactly what I did. From what I was able to find, the downstairs barrels had 2 limbs and 2 legs. They weren't amazing by any means, actually quite the opposite, but they were mine. The arms are the most important part here though, because now that I have them duct taped to my nubs, I can start lockpicking, which is a roundabout way of me saying I snuck upstairs and started picking the locks on all the chests up there, in search of better limbs. The lesson here is that it always pays to be greedy. In this instance, I was able to go from shoddy skeleton legs to standard quality skeleton legs. It may not sound like much, but it's actually a pretty substantial increase in stats, which is important when you consider the fact that Shaft needs to be able to outrun all of his enemies. With a brand new set of limbs, Shaft scooted his way back around the entire city and managed to break into the armory shop. Now, it took a good 5 minutes of looting before I realized that this wasn't in fact the armory shop, but instead the headwear shop. The armory was on the other side of town, directly across from the robotics. Okay. Back to crawling. I'd made it to the armory by sunrise and immediately got to work kitting Shaft out with some solid gear. We're not looking for anything specific here, just general armor. Personally, I always love to go with the black plate jacket because it gives solid protections without enforcing any harsh stat penalties. As it turned out, leaving World's End was so much more difficult than entering it. We were in luck though, since now that Shaft had robotic legs, he could simply pop them off and the guards would lose interest immediately, not wanting to be recorded kicking the shit out of a cripple and cancelled on Twitter. This allowed me to abuse that mechanic until I was safely outside of the city walls, at which point I reattached the legs and ran off down the mountainside. By this point, I decided to specialize in martial arts because, contrary to popular belief, it's not something I've ever done before in previous playthroughs. Up until this point, I've always considered martial arts as too OP and preferred to use swords because I liked the animations better. But honestly, given the challenge parameters, I think it's worth focusing on, at least at the start. This led to my first actual fight of the playthrough, consisting of Shaft and a rogue goat. To those familiar with the game, you can probably guess how this all went down. He only does around 4 damage per hit right now, which is not gonna cut it in an actual fight. So my first task was to find an iron node, stack an inventory full of it, and then walk around for a bit so I could level my strength up some more. Not only would this increase my carrying capacity, but it would allow my kicks to feel like someone was actually kicking and not just hitting you with a paper towel. That was easier said than done though, considering every time I started to mine some iron, a goddamn river raptor would pop out of the ground and start assaulting our poor Shaft. It wasn't all bad though. After around a day of trying and failing, a passing nomad killed a river raptor, which I was then able to pick up and effectively double my strength XP gains. When I got tired of that, I'd pull a Randy Marsh.
And practice MMA in my spare time.
And by that, I'd mean I'd get my shit rocked by a wandering herd of goats. Eventually, I was able to get Shaft's strength up to level 15, meaning he's no longer encumbered when traveling. And he now does over double his starting damage, which is progress. It was around this time that Chad had talked me into visiting the Armor King. Now, up until this playthrough, I'd never even heard of the guy, let alone traveled to his shop. So this was all brand new to me. Below the Floodlands, just north of Rebirth, you can find a river. Follow that river about halfway down and you'll discover some flooded ruins. In those ruins is where you can visit the Armor King. Now, despite being reassured over a dozen times that he was friendly, I walked in to find the Armor King, along with his little robo buddies, were immediately hostile towards me. And what those assholes failed to account for, however, was for Lieutenant Dan to sneak his way back in and steal a dust coat that gave him pretty decent protections with some stat boosts. Not to worry though, I'll be back eventually. For now, I need to find somewhere to set up camp, and what better place to choose than the safe house just outside of Rebirth. I'm going to use this as a temporary base since I can't just walk into a city and purchase one for a multitude of reasons. I also don't want to build my own settlement yet since that'll trigger raids, and if it's one thing we don't need right now, it's an army of cannibals, bandits, or Holy Nation soldiers kicking Shaft's teeth in because he put a small shack down. I also swapped out the stronger armor for a more stealthy approach. Even with the clothing swaps though, my current legs need an upgrade, which means it's time to head to Mongrel. The plan is really simple. Sprint to Mongrel, steal legs, sprint out before getting taken down by the guards. Shaft can get up to 21 miles per hour, which should be enough to outrun any ninjas guarding the city. Or so I thought. In reality, Shaft was taking damage before even entering the city. To make matters worse, I also fucked up when I finally made it to the robotic shop. I accidentally grabbed 2 left legs, and when I went to swap them out, I completely forgot that removing the legs knocks you out momentarily. It was during this momentary lapse of consciousness that Shaft was kidnapped and placed in a cage. Now, I did manage to cram one of those legs back onto him, but you need 2 to walk, so it wouldn't really do me that much good if I couldn't get the other. The biggest problem was the fact that every time I tried to escape, Someone would just walk by, scoop Shaft up off the ground, and toss him back in a cage. Now I only had a 500 cat bounty, so they'd come by in about 10 hours to release Shaft, but during that time, I could take advantage of the high-leveled cages and put a few more levels into lockpicking. After around 6 hours of lockpicking, Shaft managed to break out again, this time making it all the way to the front door, only to get jumped by 10 people as soon as he stepped outside. This bumped the bounty up to 1,000 cats. After trying and failing 2 more times and seeing the bounty go up to 1,500, I decided to just wait out the 30-hour sentence and hope for something better to come of it. I'm just kidding. I managed to break out and drag Shaft all the way over to the robotic shop, where he managed to steal a scout leg, thief's arm, and a steady arm, giving Shaft boosts in crossbows, dexterity, lockpicking, thievery, athletics, and stealth. The best part? 3 of the 4 limbs are specialized grade, with the 4th being a masterwork stealth leg. In just 12 short days, we've managed to survive the cannibal plains, gather enough food for long-term survival, and obtain some of the best robotic limbs in the game. Crazy to think that this is still the start of the story. Oh, and not that it matters all that much, but during his stay in Mongrel, Shaft's lockpicking got all the way up to 35. Now that I've got the limbs to survive and outrun pretty much any threat in the game, it's time to head back to World's End. This time, for a crossbow. My thought process is to use a crossbow to bleed an enemy, and then swap over to martial arts to train that skill in relative safety. The biggest issue with stealing a crossbow is that 99% of the bows are locked up in chests. Sure, there's a ton of bolts out and available, but those are useless if you can't find a bow that fires them. Luckily for Shaft though, we managed to find one at the very top of the ranger shop. Sure, it was a complete piece of shit, but it's better than nothing. Now, it's time for the Great Escape. No, not the World War II movie with Steve McQueen and James Garner. I'm talking about the Jack Sparrow-esque escape while being chased by an entire city of ninjas. After several hours of running, only one single tech hunter was in chase, at which point Shaft pulled out the shoddy crossbow and started blasting bolts into the dude. Since he's hot garbage with a junk bow, it took a few hours, but after putting close to 50 bolts into the guy, he finally dropped, allowing Shaft to steal his reinforced saber. Before we really get going here, I ran back to the safe house and rested up for the remainder of day 12. Heading into day 13, we found ourselves out in the floodlands, but I'm not out scavenging ruins right now. There's a different reason we're out in this hellhole, and that reason is this asshole. Now, in any normal playthrough, Burn is just another NPC that everyone loves to add to their squad. At his absolute worst, he gives you free lodging and access to a skeleton bed. Again, for free. But in this playthrough, he fucking hates our guts. So this is gonna be Shaft's tower now. Well, not yet, but we're gonna take it from him eventually. Even though he's considered one of the weaker NPCs in the game, he's still got several levels on our boy Shaft here, so it's gonna be a slow and tedious process of wearing him down, slowly leveling our skills until eventually he falls. And even once we finally win a fight, that's not the end of it, because I plan on capturing him and using him to spar with to work on toughness, martial arts, and dodging. I'm also starting each fight with an assassination attempt, because even the failures give me like 4 or 5 levels an attempt at the start. Now, it may have taken over 3 rounds before finally getting my first win, and even then it was just a knockout, but that knockout paved the way for some solid sparring. Basically, what I did was take his sword and armor, drop that on the floor, and then proceeded to literally kick the shit out of Burns. In reality, it was much more in line with that 2 retards fighting meme, because there were multiple times where it was just these 2 dipshits missing each other for like a full minute straight. It took about 8 in-game hours of martial arts fighting before Shaft successfully knocked out Burns. Unfortunately, I was distracted watching the Pat McAfee show and didn't get to see it, but I did happen to look back just as this big-ass robo-spider was creeping up on me, so I was able to save the playthrough and dip out before it got too close. After taking a short break to rest up, we were back out for another round of rolling and missing kicks on the afternoon of day 14. It is nice to see some shots landing for almost triple the damage we had started with. From the last fight alone, Shaft's martial arts skill had increased up to 12 from 3, so the progress is there. Not to mention the dodge skill is up to 27 and still climbing. As a reward for a second victory, I allowed Shaft to rest at the skeleton repair bench in Burns Tower. For my next step on the MMA journey, it was back to mining iron. We need to fill up Shaft's inventory and then try to fight Burn while encumbered. By morning on day 15, with 100 weight on the line, Shaft and Burn went at it again. Each successful hit grants about 2% of a strength level, while giving around 6% for martial arts. By that evening, we were sitting at 17 strength and 15 martial arts with a whopping 27 in assassination. Burn did end up getting popped by a spider, so Shaft reset him in the skeleton repair bed and they were back at it before the end of the night. Unfortunately, I had OBS pause while all of that happened, but I did notice it when I went to do some strength training, so oops. Anyway, after spending close to 12 hours leveling up strength 5 times, we were attacked by a random skeleton roaming the floodlands. I had to drop Burn and all the extra shit just to escape alive. At this point, I'd been grinding martial arts for several days now, so I decided to take a short break from that and explore some of the ruins throughout the floodlands. The first building I found was inaccessible, but the second one had several weapons locked inside of it, such as a mace and a springback crossbow. It also had a high-grade mask that I swapped mine out for, since the protections were just too good to pass up. The third building I found was heavily guarded by security spiders. Since I don't have the capability to fight them, I made a mental note of it and figured I would come back later when the fight was more manageable. I do have a really good bow and the specialist grade springbat though, so I dropped my other bolts and set off back to World's End to hopefully find some heavies. Well, that was easy. Now to get far enough away that I can begin to train my crossbow skill in peace. I know there are some pretty cheesy methods to grind this, but I always prefer to level crossbows in a more legit fashion because I just really enjoy using them. They're just so satisfying to use, even on tech hunters. I will say, it's also just fun to train on some river raptors and hit them for over 100 damage in a single bolt. What followed this little training montage was a stroll back through the lands that I'd crawled through just 2 weeks ago. Remember that battle we got to witness where the bodies were floating in the air while beak things picked at their remains? Well, I found the building again, and as it turns out, everyone had either been killed or eaten alive or participated in the rapture, I guess, because the building's abandoned. Inside, I found a ton of cooked vegetables, ration packs, and food cubes, all of which found their way into my inventory. Now this is a problem I always tend to run into when I try a nomad playstyle. My inner loot goblin comes out and I always end up carrying way more than I should, as you can see from my total weight. Not only is this a problem in general, but it's made even worse when you consider the fact that I'm still running around the ruins and exploring buildings for the thrill of it. Kinda hard to loot anything when your entire inventory is stacked with weapons you'll never use, too much food you'll never eat, and other random oddities. With that being said, I'm not gonna let that stop me from exploring or fucking around. This set of ruins, located just northwest of the Floodlands, was really interesting to me because it's the first one I've found where there's a bridge leading to it. This has gotta be one of the most interesting layouts for a POI that I've ever seen in Kenshi, and it's a massive reason why I love this game so much. Inside, the ground floor appears empty with a bunch of loot laid out in a path luring you upstairs. On the second floor, waiting for you, is a massive group of cannibals. The scene in front of you is that they're baiting you up the stairs with splint kits and food and electronic components, and I love that because up on the 3rd floor, you can find dozens of cages all soaked in the blood of the poor souls who'd wandered up here in search of adventure and treasures. Or James Woods looking for a piece of candy. It's really up to you. It makes me feel like this building was entirely made for me though, because I fell for it immediately. I'm not about to pass up free medkits. The battle was almost entirely centered around using a springbat crossbow. Shocker, I know. If I can implant in you one thought from this video, it's that the springbat is a fantastic weapon that you should utilize whenever you get the chance. It can one-shot the scrawny cannibals, has insane bleed potential that can easily stack, and even does 75 to 100 damage to mid-tier enemies. Like, just watch this. All you need to do is kite them around the open area and take shots at your own discretion. As I'd cleared up the first group, reinforcements arrived, having just returned from a nearby patrol route. Taking care of them was a breeze as well. Now all that's left to do is pull the final few cannibals defending the 2nd floor camp. The fight itself was relatively easy. I even got to pull off an epic 1v1 after giving a cannibal brain damage by lodging a bolt in his skull. The most satisfying moment of the fight came at the end though, when, after staggering the cannibal, Shaft landed a beautiful kick directly to the face, knocking them unconscious and solidifying his victory over the tribe. Heading up to the caged room, we dispatched one final cannibal before looting the place, finding a skeleton arm and an imprisoned escaped servant locked in a recovery coma. Not wanting to leave them for dead, Shaft picked the lock, grabbed the poor soul, and left the building with a pile of bodies behind him. There was only one place I could think to bring the escaped servant, and that was the original safe house just outside of Rebirth, where he could rest up and be nursed back to health. There was no guarantee that he'd survive on his own out in the wasteland, but it was better than being locked in a cannibal cage and waiting to be eaten. Someone should probably tell him he's running directly into the Rebirth mine. Nobody? Oh, okay. Moving on. Anyway, back to training. I ended up stumbling across another Flotsam Ninja outpost and figured that this would be a great target to grind some martial arts skills off of, mainly because these guys are typically in the 50s. Before I could do that though, I'd need to kidnap one. Something that's much easier said than done. It took a few hours, but Shaft was able to incapacitate several ninjas, taking their weapons and armor, before deciding on which one to pull with. This guy's in a pretty hefty blood loss coma, but he's also got stomach, arm, and leg injuries that Shaft can take advantage of. After partially healing up the ninja's stomach, we began making our way back to the safe house. The goal here is to keep the left arm and leg wounded to slow down the ninja and drastically weaken their ability to fight in hand-to-hand combat. This levels the field for a sparring match when you consider the fact that the ninja has around triple the combat levels of Shaft. By the time the duo had made it back to the safe house, the ninja was dying, but that was to be expected. They were still dealing with a blood loss coma, and their stomach was getting worse, so Shaft healed up the ninja's stomach as their blood pool recovered, but left the arm and leg alone for now. As soon as they stood up though, it was on sight. Unlike the fights with Burn where Shaft was only gaining 3 to 5 XP per landed shot, he was now gaining between 20 and 30% with each landed hit. The only problem? He's still embarrassingly terrible at martial arts. And even with the ninja moving like a methed out Steven Seagal, Shaft was still no match for him. That being said, it only took one more hit to end up taking out the ninja. leaving them unconscious in the dirt outside of the safe house. Whenever the ninja would recover enough to stand up, Shaft would run out, kick him into the stratosphere, and then head back inside to rest. This went on for most of the night and into the morning of day 19. These fights were exponentially easier due to the fact that the ninja's left leg was so damaged that he was unable to stand on his own, meaning he really couldn't fight back, allowing Shaft to practice his MMA skills freely. When the ninja was simply too wounded to train on, he'd be placed in a bed until his chest and stomach injuries healed enough to be tossed back outside and beaten senseless. With each fight, Shaft was able to gain at least one level in martial arts combat, making this the strongest XP grind I'd had since starting the game. After a few more roundhouse kicks to the sun, I decided to provide a full round of first aid to the ninja. Their arm and leg were all but maxed out in terms of damage, so it would take at least the rest of the day before they were usable, giving us a few more rounds of free XP before he'd start fighting back. While waiting for the guy to heal, I started messing around with knockouts. If you don't know, you can chain failed attempts by spam clicking as the animation finishes. With this method, I was able to gain over 25 levels in the assassination skill in less than 10 in-game minutes. By the morning of day 20, the ninja had healed up enough to stand on his own, which meant a more even ground for fighting. Now, despite gaining over 10 levels since starting this training, Shaft was still no match compared to the wounded man in front of him. It often took Shaft playing dead, healing up, and then kiting the ninja around the room, slowly landing shots in between telegraphed kicks. After accidentally kicking the ninja into a coma, Shaft set off back to Burn's tower to take advantage of the free skeleton bed. It was during this healing process that I got to watch Burn get absolutely decimated by a wandering spider mech. Since Shaft had fully healed by this point, he headed down, picked up Burn, and placed him in the skeleton repair bed until he was healed enough to head back out on patrol. As payment for saving his life, Shaft beat Burn into the blue screen of death and then slapped him back into the skeleton bed before heading back out on his own. It was time to try out some of Shaft's newfound skills on an actual target. Further north lies a cannibal village belonging to the Blood Reavers clan, but this camp was more than just a random village. It housed the chief of the Blood Reavers clan. Since my stealth is over 90 and I've got some solid limbs and gear, I was able to send Shaft in, kidnap the chief as the sun set, and take him up to the mountainside, where the two fought a pretty lopsided 1v1. Granted, there are much stronger enemies in the area, but it was a good trial to see how far we've come. And I gotta say, it wasn't even close. The chief didn't land a single hit on Shaft for the entire fight. After knocking him into a coma, Shaft simply snapped the man's neck and was on his way, directly into a group of scrawny cannibals belonging to the same tribe. Now, normally, I'd simply outrun the tiny bastards, but this was another great opportunity to get some crossbow training in. Unfortunately, the fight only lasted a few minutes before the entire group just ignored Shaft, turned, and walked off into the night. No idea how or why that happened, but okay. As I followed them though, it became pretty clear as to why they dipped. Out in the distance, that same group of cannibals were duking it out with a band of escaped servants. Both of these groups hate Shaft, but XP is XP, so he hopped in, taking out a few cannibals with his crossbow before swapping to martial arts. Sadly, I overstayed my welcome here, and after realizing that Shaft was surrounded and had taken too much damage to his right leg, I tried to retreat him back over the hill. The biggest concern is the fact that I no longer outrun these guys, making it insanely tough to shake them. Now, the reason these little guys were so persistent was because we were right next to Dead Cat, the cannibal capital of Kenshi. Luckily, Shaft was able to get far enough away from the city that by the time the cannibals knocked him out, he just kind of ragdolled down the hill, causing the cannibals to immediately lose interest in him. From there, he healed up, got back on his feet, and began making his way back to the safe house. The problem is that we needed to pass through that same cannibal village we just murdered the chief of. Shockingly, the tribe wasn't too thrilled about that and proceeded to chase Shaft back to the floodlands. By this point, the captured ninja had recovered and set off back to his outpost, so the safe house was vacant, allowing us to rest and recover in peace. As Shaft recovered though, I thought to myself, this entire territory is dominated by cannibal tribes. No one does anything about it though, because the major factions don't care enough, and the smaller factions are too scared to go to war with any of the tribes. This results in small skirmishes taking place wherever the patrols cross paths, but the cannibals have the numbers to absolutely steamroll any of the minor factions or towns in the area. Someone should do something about that. And thus, a plan was formed to systematically dismantle the dominant stranglehold that the cannibal tribes held over the northern coast. To weaken them, we'd target tribal leaders. See, the cannibal tribes constantly war within themselves, but if you cut off the head of one of the tribes, it significantly weakens them, allowing the other tribes to swoop in and swallow up that weakened group. If nothing else, they'll do what their name suggests and cannibalize the smaller tribe. Don't believe me? I made a whole video on it a while back. That's not important right now though. For now, it's time to go target some of these tribes and slowly regain control of the coastline. The first target? Kaka Back, the leader of the blind-eyed kin. Now remember, we don't need a war of attrition to win. We just need to cut the head off the snake. Unfortunately for us though, we can't just execute some of these tribal leaders, meaning we have to take them on repeatedly in 1v1 fights on Rust, quickscopes and no-scopes only, 360 final kill. At some point though, I must have accidentally queued Shaft to heal up the tribal leader, meaning I'd have to wait for them to recover from their blood loss KO before taking them out for good. Or I could head back to the fishing village and drop them off in the center, letting the villagers deal with the leader when he woke up. Before that though, Shaft would have to survive an encounter with some hungry bandits. Normally, I'd just skip a fight like this, but I chose to keep this one in because I wanted to showcase just how far we've progressed. Looking back to the burn fight where I was barely able to beat a weakened robot with no martial arts skill, to being able to successfully defeat a full party of hungry bandits. I'm still having to rely on the crossbow for now, but the goal is to eventually use it to just initially engage an enemy, or to finish them off as they retreat, instead of spamming it throughout the entire fight. I think one of the most difficult aspects of this playthrough is the fact that literally everyone hates you. In this instance, Shaft and the cannibal hunters should be working in tandem, but instead, they want nothing more than to see Shaft's head on a pike. Regardless, that same village that we'd taken the previous cannibal chief from was now under the rule of Meat Lord's horde. There's an unnamed cannibal chief here, so Shaft knocked them out and executed them. This alone won't do much though. We'll still need to find and remove the leader of the tribe. Hopefully the village in the distance will have some payoff. While it's not the Meat Lord's horde camp, I did find the Broken Finger tribe and their leader, that fucking name, I don't know. Anyway, Shaft was able to beat them in hand-to-hand combat, using the crossbow to finish off the leader by shooting a leg clean off of its body, before heading to some quote-unquote weird huts in the distance. These weird huts turned out to be the base camp for the Canhead Exiles, yet another tribe of ruthless cannibals. The leader? A man by the name of Baron Samedi? I think that's how you say it. Isn't that the fucking guy from Smite? Luckily, it was late by the time Shaft arrived, and he was able to sneak in and take a look at what the chief had on him. How about one of the greatest polearms in the game? Wanting to leave nothing to chance, Shaft kidnapped Baron and took him out into the plains to face off with him. Now initially, the cannibal leader tried to escape after being given a healthy dose of brain damage. That being said, he couldn't resist a fight with Shaft, leaving him unconscious in the sand. After regaining said consciousness, he tried to flee again, only to be shot down and left bleeding out. Well, I say left bleeding out, but in reality, I dumped the body in the ocean, effectively drowning the tribal leader. Next up, we finally have Meat Lord's horde. Some massive patrols in the area, and a village nearby, so I headed on over to it. The village is literally named First Village, and it's home to Meat Lord. Can you guess who he's in charge of? Maybe Meat Lord, maybe? Wanna see some bullshit? That staff I took from Baron weighs almost 40 kilograms. So I guess that'll just be left behind because fuck that. So what I've learned is that you can't simply knock out Meat Lord, kidnap him, and fill him with bolts. Instead, Shaft will have to fight his way through the village, take out the cannibal chiefs, then, and only then, will he get a shot at Meat Lord. After killing about 30 cannibals, Shaft returned to the town to find most of the remaining inhabitants sleeping. Taking the opportunity, he knocked out Meat Lord, dropped him by the hillside, and prepared for the fight. Oh, that was really anticlimactic. Just kidding, he popped back up while I wasn't paying attention and just buried poor Shaft in the dirt. Luckily, Shaft was able to recover and chase down Meat Lord, only for the cannibal leader to pass out due to severe head trauma. There's nothing left to do but wait at this point, so Shaft set his sleeping mat down and waited for Meat Lord to die, only for a group of cannibals to come by and try to retrieve his body. This led to another fight that saw Shaft snapping Meat Lord's neck and killing 2 more cannibals before being taken prisoner by the remnants of Meat Lord's horde. We weren't in any serious danger though. As soon as he was placed in a cage, Shaft was able to heal up, pick the lock, and escape to the coast, where he placed his sleeping mat to rest and recover. Later on, while roaming the wasteland, I found another set of ruins containing several maps. These maps outlined several additional ruins and outposts in the Deadlands and Iron Valley, so we'll have to pay that area a visit eventually. For now though, we have one more tribe to eliminate before our final target, the Skull Drinker clan, and their leader, Locklek. I was able to pull most of the village out into the wasteland before looping around and hiding in the main hut, where I was able to wait for Locklek to return to that night. Well, that was the plan anyway, until I looked out to see the remnants of Meat Lord's horde assaulting the village and incapacitating our target. From there, all I needed to do was scoop him up, take him away from the fighting, wait for him to stand on his own, and then execute him with a bolt to the stomach. All that's left to do now is make the trek to Dead Cat to eliminate the self-proclaimed Grand Wizard. This is a cannibal-run city, so the best way to even make it to the Grand Wizard is simply to wait until nightfall when he's sleeping. That way, just like with Meatlord, I can sneak in, kidnap, and execute him without drawing the attention of every cannibal in a 5-mile radius. What the fuck just happened? After successfully sneaking back into the hut, I was able to spam assassination attempts on the Grand Wizard until one finally landed, at which point Shaft scooped him up and took off into the wasteland while being chased by a massive group of cannibals. Want to hear me pull one out of the Star Wars playbook? Somehow, someway, Shaft was able to outrun the cannibals and reach the ocean, where they immediately gave up pursuit. I always love the thought process of that. Like, imagine the president was kidnapped and the Secret Service saw them jumping into the ocean and they just went, fuck it, they got away. Maybe next time. Anyway, with the Grand Wizard captured, it's time for an epic duel. Of course, before that though, we'll need to discard his legendary weapon. And with the Grand Wizard officially dead, the cannibal plains were thrown into complete disarray. Tribes cannibalized each other in a chaotic fight to become the new Grand Wizard. Not to mention that most of the powerhouse tribes in the area were currently falling apart due to their chiefs and leaders being executed by a name synonymous with dick jokes. It had taken 26 days, but Shaft had risen from a measly torso and dispatched the cannibal threat in the northern lands. Now, it was time for another journey. Legend has it there are some hidden cities within the Great Desert where the slave trade runs rampant. Within those cities hides an emperor responsible for Shaft's situation. Sure, he could take some personal responsibility and call 1-800-GAMBLER or whatever the hotline is, but it's easier to just blame his problems on everyone else, so that's the narrative we're going with. Regardless, welcome to the desert. I was gonna say hell, but let's be honest, Detroit clears this place. Funny enough, this isn't even the Great Desert, it's just the helmet-wearing stepbrother, Bast. If you've never been, it's a war-torn part of the map where cannibals, samurai, and Holy Nation patrols battle it out in a never-ending war of attrition. It's not somewhere you should ever enter unprepared and ill-equipped, but here we are. On the bright side, there's a ton of destroyed towns and outposts, all of which provide some cover and a few beds to rest and recover at. These patrols can be deadly if you're not prepared, but if you've got a high sneaking skill, it's a fantastic way to continue leveling it up while also getting in some assassination practice. You can then take one of these conscripts and use them to train your combat on. In contrast to the compact samurai patrols, the Holy Nation Empire likes to send out full-on battalions. Again, normally scary, but in our case, we get to farm them and leave a trail of bodies behind us. Throughout Bast, you can find a few guarded outposts, just like this one, where the samurai soldiers are waiting at their post. Picking a fight with them is futile in this instance because there's a whole garrison hiding inside the building, and they're way stronger than poor Shaft, resulting in a strategic retreat back to a destroyed town to rest in for the night. Just before sunrise, young Shaft set back out and got some additional grinding in, tacking on 4 more levels before kidnapping a powerful samurai and taking him on in a 1v1. After defeating the hiver, his human buddy came sprinting up the hill to pound Shaft back into the ground. Once I recovered, I traveled east until I came upon the city of Drin, which was under samurai control. As Shaft approached though, it became clear that a battle for the ruins was underway. Bodies littered the street, and since he had no stake in who won or lost, Shaft just started swinging on anyone with a weapon. Unfortunately, he was still no match for the samurai conscripts. Vast is still a bit much for me, so instead, it's back to wandering the desert and looking for a burning bush or some shit like that. While I didn't find a bush, I did find a pair of bandits to kick the shit out of, quite literally kicking a limb off of one of their bodies. After teabagging to assert dominance, I traveled to the ocean where we came across a town by the name of Port North. Much like any other property in the Great Desert, it's a slaver's gold mine. While I was distracted by the vibes of the town, Shaft took out several guards, ultimately leaving them bleeding out in the sand. With some of the guards defeated though, it's time to rest up. There aren't many places to rest and hide in the Great Desert, at least in relative safety. Skimmers, bandits, slavers, and other enemies all roam the desert constantly hunting for their next target. And the best way to become another statistic is to sleep out in the open. Because of this, I found a nice safe island for Shaft to rest up at in between some combat. It's about time to start thinking about setting up an outpost though. It'll just give us some extra protection when we need to rest and recover. I also just really enjoy making outposts in Kenshi. It's not that we can't just steal anything we need, we definitely can, but I really just enjoy the Iron Man approach of crafting your own supplies and only stealing what you need to get started. After some more exploring, I settled on creating a small camp next to an abandoned town, mainly because the abandoned town had enough iron plates and building materials to craft a stone mine and stone processor, both of which are needed to make your own building material. This is the downside of the Great Desert. There's always something hiding in the sandstorm waiting to jump you. On the bright side, at least the food comes to us now. Anyway, we need 2 more building materials to make a stone mine, so it's off to a recently discovered stone mining outpost to see what I can find. The answer? Nothing. It's a slave camp with expert marksmen guarding it. Luckily, I was able to toss everything onto the ground before Shaft was taken as a slave, meaning if we're able to escape, we can grab our shit and move out. I spent a few seconds watching Shaft mine before remembering that he can run at the speed of light, bringing a quick end to our slavery arc. Kinda. I tried to run it back in Shobutai, only to be harpooned yet again. I made the mistake of thinking I could easily escape and run back to my camp, only to once again end up with a harpoon to the chest. At this point, both Shaft's stomach and chest were in the negatives, meaning one more harpoon to either of them risks killing him, and I wasn't gonna let that happen. So instead, I opted to have Shaft spend the night recovering in his cage. By morning, he was in stable condition and I was able to break him out, pick up his gear, and run back into the city, scoop up the other 2 building materials, and finally escape for good. The only problem? The guards just don't quit. Luckily, the guards didn't recapture Shaft this time, they just beat him unconscious instead. Anyway, I managed to get Shaft back to his outpost and finish up the stone mine, meaning we can now craft building materials as needed. Before we get started though, I'm gonna need a worker. That's a bit hard to do, given everyone hates poor Shaft and he's 1 billion cats in debt, meaning we can't just head into a city and hire some workers. Luckily for Shaft though, I know just the guy. See that tower? Well, on the top floor, locked away in a cage, you'll find a relatively useless grunt. In between us and him though, lies somewhere around 50 dust bandits, meaning it's time for a combat montage. Oh, real quick though, when it comes to dust bandits, they have crossbowmen as well, but if you line up the melee attackers in front of you, the enemy crossbowmen will just fire bolts into the backs of their allies, making our life a hell of a lot easier. That being said, this wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. It took getting knocked out several times while slowly picking off dozens of bosses and bandits before we finally reached the top floor. During the fighting, we were able to take out the Dust King and loot his body to earn a legendary saber. With no enemies left, we picked the lock on the cage and recruited our first companion, Cat. Funny story with him though, while he was giving his dialogue, Shaft kept trying to attack him because, again, everyone's hostile by default, so I had to keep him busy while Cat finished talking, at which point he joined the Shaftless. Now, Cat's got horrible stats, but that's okay. I'm not planning to use him to fight for me, and instead, he'll be Shaft's pack mule and free labor.
That just sounds like slavery with extra steps!
With Cat and Shaft safely back at their little campsite, I set Cat to get started mining stone while Shaft set off to complete his mission. You see, over in the city of Heft lies a dripped out emperor by the name of Tengu. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. He's one of the shot callers and the mastermind behind the plan to send our boy Shaft to the peeler machine over a month ago. Well, at least one of the masterminds. Little did he expect Shaft to rise up and erect himself as one of the most prolific fighters in all of the lands. Alright, I promise I'm almost out of dick jokes. Maybe a few more later on, but for now, we're good. Anyway, Emperor Tengu hangs out in the throne room in Heft, guarded by samurai elites, captains, and heavies, making it incredibly dangerous to enter the building. Factor in the number of guards around the city, and you're gearing up for a battle lasting several weeks. That is, unless you have 95 stealth and 71 assassination, then it's a cakewalk. I love how all the guards, just like the cannibals, gave up after chasing for like 20 seconds. Like, you can still see Heft in the distance, and they're just like, nah, we tried. Except for this one elite. He's a true ride or die. Go him. Now, after dealing with the bodyguard, I stole Tengu's weapons from him so that the fight could be more, even. I'll explain. To be short with it, Tengu has the best katana in the game. The feather blade does 1.98 cut damage with a 2x blood loss, 15% armor penetration, plus 10 defense, and plus 10% damage boost against humans, and I can't just let him have that. He'd one-shot Shaft. Anyway, enjoy a fist fight between the two. Obviously, Shaft is much stronger in martial arts than the Emperor, and bested the man without the Emperor landing a single shot. Funny enough, Shaft actually ended the fight with an epic nut punch. One fist fight wouldn't be enough to kill the man though, so Shaft took the opportunity to try out his new katana. Once he'd taken several beatings, we moved him into the abandoned town near the outpost in order to be a bit more discreet. I didn't want to risk the man getting away just because a random samurai patrol passed through and saw us. When Tengu was finally beaten to within an inch of his life, Shaft picked him up and brought him to the ocean, with plans to toss his remains there. Along the way though, he encountered a group of rebel fighters who wanted Tengu for themselves, resulting in a chase for the Emperor's body. After reaching a small island, Shaft executed Emperor Tengu and swam out to sea, leaving his body to the ocean where no one would ever be able to recover it. That completed, I took some time to focus on grinding out a few more skills. For example, toughness. If you don't know, you can cheese toughness XP by getting up after playing dead. The more enemies in the area, the more XP you gain. And considering there's a massive group of triangle bandits in the distance, what better way to train than by letting them kick the shit out of poor old Shaft here? Even with half the bandits out on patrol, I was managing to earn entire levels just by standing back up. This went on for most of the night, and while I couldn't get stuck in the loop where you keep standing up and automatically passing out, I did manage to boost about 4 levels out of it the old-fashioned way. Naturally, this led to some pretty substantial damage to Shaft's robotic limbs, and since we don't have our own skeleton repair bed, the only other option available at the moment is to embark on a multi-day journey back to Burns Tower to make the necessary repairs. During Shaft's absence, Cat began processing the stone into building materials, which could then be used to build a small shack for the duo to escape the elements with. With Shaft now fully healed, it's time for another character arc. A while back, I had received a comment from someone telling me I should go double strength hands and then wield something crazy like a scythe. Apologies for whoever commented that, I wasn't able to find it after sifting back through the streams, but rest assured, the idea was firmly planted into my thick head. And given the circumstances, I think now might be a fantastic time to try it out. The idea around it is incredibly simple. Go double strength arms for the massive damage boost along with the ability to wield some insanely heavy weapons, like a scythe. This leads to Big Green Number popping up overhead, which makes Big Dumb Brain happy. To my knowledge, the best place to get one of these weapons is in the Iron Valley. But before we do that, it's back to Mongrel to find and steal some specialist grade limbs. Each of these gives a 20% boost to strength, and they stack, so now we have a 40% boost to our strength. The only issue with that is the fact that I've been literally running from the grind. Shaft's strength is only level 32 at the moment, so we'll have to fix that. And my method to fix that is to load up a big ass backpack with iron, throw the heavy limbs into Shaft's inventory, have him pick up Cat, and have him impersonate Moses for several days, taking his strength from level 32 up to level 50 by day 41. With our strength now sufficiently boosted, it's time to head into Iron Valley to steal a scythe. Originally, I was planning to raid one of the outposts here to steal one, but instead, I ended up coming across a lost armory. Inside of this armory were several locked chests containing heavy weapons and hackers, but I was only interested in one thing. As it turns out though, I managed to find that one thing on the second floor, so I had Shaft take it and begin heading back to camp. But while on his way back, Shaft happened across another lost armory. Entering this one revealed around a dozen mech spiders waiting to pounce, so I said fuck it and left it in the dust. After returning to camp, I swapped out Shaft's arms for the strength ones, and set off to find some unlucky bandits to test the scythe out on. The goal wasn't necessarily to win the fight, but rather to establish a baseline to see how rough this was gonna be. It's important to remember that I'm going from a low mid-range martial artist to an absolute bum who just found a big heavy scythe to swing around. Shaft's melee attack is like 4 or 5, and his polearm skill is literally 1. Luckily, the thing can hit multiple enemies, so there's actually a good reason to run into groups of bandits instead of those pesky 1v1 fights. It also gives me an excuse to work on Shaft's toughness some more as well. By the end of the night, Shaft's toughness was up to 70, his polearms went from 1 to 9, and his melee attack is up to 7. Nothing amazing by any means, but it's a decent start nonetheless. An immediate area of improvement is simply the armor that Shaft is using. He's currently still rocking that dust coat from like a month ago, which is great for melee and martial arts, but pretty crappy for actual defense, at least compared to something like a plate jacket. As it would turn out though, we do have a plate jacket, all the way back at that Rebirth hideout. So that's where I sent him. After swapping out the martial arts gear for some quality armor, it was off to Burns Tower for a quick rest before heading back to the desert to fight some more bandits. After about 3 or 4 rounds of getting absolutely steamrolled by some triangle bandits, I remembered that I never showed off the aftermath of killing the Emperor. Oops. So, executing the man has some pretty massive consequences, at least to the Great Desert and United Cities regions. For starters, the rebels are winning the war now. They've completely decimated Heft, leaving multiple buildings in ruins, including the HQ, which is now completely abandoned. Displaced peasants and rebel fighters litter the city, all of which are still hostile towards poor Shaft because, gambling addiction or something. Other cities, such as Shobatai, are still standing, however, which means I can still practice my assassination skills and loot some more medical supplies. Stoat is also still standing, but there are several destroyed buildings now littering the city. There are some additional influences as well, such as several samurai patrols no longer spawning in, and instead being replaced by additional rebel spawns. It also cancels all outpost raids regarding tax collection, but we hadn't encountered any so far through the playthrough, so it's not something that you'd notice anyway. With that though, I'm about done with the desert, so I sent Shaft down to Shem to start training on some dust bandits. I always love Shem because you get dust bandits, hungry bandits, triangle bandits, and beak things, and every once in a while you get one of these awesome battles where like 50 hungry bandits fight 2 beak things and it's somehow an even fight. If the bandits manage to defeat the beak things, I can loot the meat off of them, providing Shaft with enough food to last days, even weeks out here. That is, until the triangle bandits come sprinting in to steal all of it. At least we get more free entertainment though. Since the bandits were too sprawled out to really warrant using a scythe, I had Shaft swap to his bow and katana to deal with the bandits individually. Over the next few days, I had Shaft wander through the lands of Shem, taking on various bandits and slowly but surely mastering the art of swinging a big heavy object into people's kneecaps. In all seriousness though, this is something that Kenshi does that is entirely unmatched by any other game. The grind is so satisfying because it's one of those things that you can actually see improvement on over time and in multiple ways, aside from just a number ticking up. You might get your shit rocked by hungry bandits at the start, but you'll slowly start winning fights against them until they're not much of a threat anymore. Then it's on to dust bandits and triangle bandits. It's a new, stronger enemy, but the process is still the same. You get your ass kicked, realize you're weak and frail, then, over time, go from knocking down one bandit to taking out entire groups of them in one fight. If that's not enough, you also still get that dopamine rush of watching green number go up because make Big Dumb Brain happy. There's also all of the animations for skills like martial arts that develop as the skill levels up, making the fighting style more lethal. It's just something I absolutely love in this game and something I haven't seen other games be able to replicate in that same way. Now the fighting did go on for several days until I felt that Shaft had been sufficiently used and abused. His polearm was up to 42, attack up to 37, defense at 63, and toughness at 79. Now, it's time to go do something incredibly stupid, like swim all the way out to the Western Islands and kill a bunch of hivers, because... Do we really need a reason, or is the fact that I want to kill some hivers good enough? But first, we need to bully burn some more. Truth be told, there is a reason I wanted to head out west. See, back when I did a bounty hunter video like a year ago, I tried to kidnap the queen. Nope, not the one who says funny, but the hiver queen out on an island all by herself with some weird obsessive guards. Well, I did manage to kidnap her, but as it turns out, no one wants a stuck-up queen for a prize. So I set her down on an island and she just kinda dove back in the water and floated away, never to be seen again. So this time, I thought it'd be fun to head on over there, explore her island a bit, I don't know, commit some incredibly heinous war crimes, and then just kinda swim away unscathed. I get the feeling that not everyone is bought in on this, so here. This despicable queen tried to ruin sports gambling by getting rid of prize picks. She said if hivers can't put together a 3 to 6 leg parlay, then no one should be able to. Are you happy now? You were all disturbed with Shaft killing an innocent tribe like Anakin with the Sand People, but now she's actually a horrible person trying to ruin the fun of millions of people. She probably even took a sponsored steak ad to purchase the island she lives on. What a scumbag. If anything, Shaft's actually a hero. Now this took well over a day to actually swim to the island. Mainly because I would swim to one, and then realize I was on the wrong island, so I'd hop back in and swim to another, which would also not be the correct island. Eventually, I did happen across an island with a tower on it in the distance, so I sent Shaft over to it. This wasn't the Queen's Island, but I figured why not stop in and say hello to the resident fogmen who, for whatever reason, are living in exile out here. First, it's probably a good idea to deal with the local wildlife. Wouldn't want them swinging into third party during any battles. I chose to set up camp on the small island just off the main beach. That way, if any fogmen did happen to chase after Shaft, he could fire bolts back at them as they swam across the small gap between the two. But enough of that. Now, it's time to take the tower. It should be noted that dozens of fogmen live here. The layout is very similar to the Dust Boss base, where there's multiple levels of the tower, all packed with fighters, and in this case, fogmen and princes. In total, I counted 28 of them inside, meaning we've got a fight on our hands. Now since Shaft is wielding the scythe, there's no benefit to fighting indoors, so I had him run in, trigger the fogmen by referencing gender studies, and then run outside to take on the hordes. The battle was actually incredibly short, at least from what I was expecting it to be. I was anticipating at least 2 days of slowly chopping through the fogmen, but instead, all of that training in Shem had really paid off for Shaft, and he was able to carve his way through all of the fogmen in a matter of hours. He was even able to push into the tower and take out the stragglers with a katana, which was really exciting for me to see, considering every single fight outside of this has been a major toss-up. In the loot room, I found a specialist grade triple shot bow, a masterwork samurai helmet, and a high quality blade iron club, but I only took the samurai helmet since the bow couldn't fit in Shaft's inventory, and I have no need for an iron club. This was a really nice pit stop, though it's important to remember it for what it was, a pit stop, and nothing else. The real goal is off in the distance on some remote island. Imagine not just having to tread water, but to physically swim for miles to a remote island. Do you guys remember in high school when you'd have to tread water for like 5 minutes and there were kids who couldn't even do that? Imagine them trying to swim for like 30 hours straight. Anyway, welcome to the Western Hive. They're made up of mostly mid to late game soldier drones and fully secluded on this tiny island. They're like the North Sentinel Island tribe of Kenshi, just as hostile and likely just as inbred. The first encounter with them was about what I expected it, with them swarming Shaft as soon as he set foot on the island. Even retreating to the opposite island isn't a safety net anymore, as some of the soldier drones will just continue chasing. But this may actually be a way to weaken them, since it allows for a ton of space to whip out the crossbow and take them down with ease. I did try to push in one more time that night and take out a few hivers with the crossbow, but I honestly don't think I took a single soldier down. Were a few of them wounded? Definitely, but it was nothing that would make a big difference. I even tried sending Shaft back in to assassinate a group of the hivers, only for him to completely whiff on a swing and wake up the entire tribe. There she is. The queen. Gross. I'm gonna be honest, I did not think I was gonna be able to just waltz in and kidnap her like that. These guys are dipshits. I don't even have high sneaking anymore. It's down to like mid-30s instead of 100 now that I've got industrial limbs. Now, I'm not just going to assassinate her though. We need to earn this win. She's got a legendary polearm, but we have a shaft. Oh god, he kicked her leg clean off her body. Then just like that, the queen is dead. Sorry, Brits. I did want to take on the Western Hivers in a true battle though, so I had Shaft bring the queen's body back to the island, only to find it overrun by fogmen. In less than 24 hours following the queen's death, the fogmen just strolled on in and managed to completely overtake the Western Hivers. Now, I'd be lying here if I said I wasn't at least a little bummed out by this. But since I'd never beaten the Western Hive in a fight, I figured I owed it to them to kick the shit out of the fogmen who'd conquered their land. It does suck that the fogmen just completely gutted the hives though, because I was really looking forward to looting the place and finding some unique items out here. But the interiors are just barren, aside from a fog prince who tried to eat our poor Shaft. Pause. That being said, I did manage to find one untouched building with a skeleton repair bed in it, so I got to check out some of the gear left behind, which was mainly economy limbs. But there were a ton of skeleton repair kits that I looted as well. Outside the hives, there are several gardens in the area, two of which were vegetable farms. This is massive for Shaft and Cat because we can harvest those and then use the vegetables from the farm to build and create our own farms, giving us a sustainable food supply in the future once we decide to settle down. Unfortunately, after several hours of farming, Shaft wasn't able to get one successful harvested crop, meaning we're still back at square one. I'll worry about that in a little bit though. For now, there's one more promise to uphold. With the western hive completely decimated, it's time to end the fogmen hordes, once and for all. The Fog King lies within the Fog Islands, just north of Mongrel. It's no secret that we have no allies there though. Come to think of it, this may be the most dangerous, or at least hostile location that we've ever gone into. Sure, the cannibals were rough, but cannibals don't travel in packs of damn near 50 soldiers, and aren't fighting mech spiders and ninjas in their spare time. The fogmen influence doesn't just stop at the islands. It looks like they've swarmed through all of the hive communes along the coast as well. Guys, I didn't alter the dialogue, I promise. Even the characters are getting in on the dick jokes at this point. It looks like they're even spilling out into normal outposts and cities at this point as well. So the upcoming fight feels a bit more warranted, even if I was the one who started this. As Shaft arrived at the outskirts of the Fog King's throne, he could hear the screams of the poor souls that had been devoured alive inside the building. Before he could even enter it though, we had to deal with the patrols of fogmen and fog heavies guarding the throne room. Issue with that is Shaft isn't used to fighting fog heavies. Compared to normal fogmen, they have practically double the stats in every combat skill. Throw in the fact that, I don't know, there's dozens of them roaming around instead of dozens of fogmen drones, and you'll find yourself in a predicament that, by the time you realize what's happening, it's already way too late. Luckily, Shaft was able to escape and run back out into the valley, even drawing out the Fog King in the process. After 2 failed attempts, I started getting nervous though. Shaft's legs were too damaged for him to run on, meaning it was almost entirely up to Cat to come in and rescue our boy. There was even a point where I was able to get Shaft to escape and was slowly but surely dodging and making repairs, only for him to be captured yet again. On the, 5th or 6th attempt, we did finally manage to escape, repair the leg enough to outrun the fogmen, before I turned around and tried to take on the Fog King and a few of his bodyguards. Now, poor Cat tried to help, but was given a Brick Tamlin dose of brain damage and left for dead. Luckily, Shaft is used to being jerked around and was able to not only escape, but he also took down the Fog King and defended Cat from another patrol of fogmen, before finally executing the king and bringing Cat back to the safe house to recover. Returning to the Fog King huts was pretty underwhelming. All of the crates are entirely empty, but I did manage to rescue Peace, though due to the 100 relations damage, I'm not allowed to heal them up, but they're still stuck following me, so this entire run basically turned into a weird escort mission where they crawled along behind Shaft until they finally succumbed to their injuries, which then allowed Shaft to perform first aid and pick them up, saving his life in the process. After recovering, Peace would leave the safe house on his own accord, wandering off into the distance. We never did see him again, but I hope he's still out there. After recovering at Burns Tower yet again, I felt like it was finally time to head south. I was satisfied with the chaos we'd caused so far. The cannibal tribes were in ruin, the United Cities launched into a massive civil war, the Western Hive eliminated, the Fog King executed, just pure chaos. Feeling satisfied with their work, the gang packed up all of their gear in the safe house and headed south. I still love how you can just turn a character into a pack mule by loading them up with gear and then having another character pick them up, and how it just does absolutely nothing to the carrying weight. Never change, Kenshi. Never change. As the duo passed through the foglands, I couldn't help but notice just how empty it now felt. There were no massive death yards full of hundreds of fogmen anymore. The camps lie empty, with no motion in the fog. After several hours of traveling, we even came across an abandoned city. It didn't appear on the map at all, there's no ownership tied to any of the buildings or anything like that, and all of them are completely empty. It was just some creepy ghost town. After a day of traveling, we found a nice quiet plot of desert to settle down in. It's over near Flats Lagoon on a small island, but it'll be perfect for what we need it for. Speaking of Flats Lagoon, it's the perfect target for some small looting runs in order to get us back on our feet and established in the area. I started simple, 3 building mats that we need for a stone mine. They don't have iron plates, so I'll need to find a way station that's carrying them and hope I get lucky. Either that, or Squin. You know what? Let's do Squin. Sure, the Sheks will start hunting us, but it's fine. While Shaft began making his way over to Squin, Cat got to work mining 50 quality stones so that we could start making our own building materials yet again. Anyway, welcome to Squin. Funny enough, the Shek guards actually know Shaft's name, which I thought was really cool. His reputation clearly precedes him, but judging from the fact that the Hell want him dead, I'm not so sure that's a good thing. With the iron plates secured, we were able to build the stone processor and set Cat to work on that while Shaft put in work at the stone mine. Now, shortly after settling in, a screech roared off in the distance. Skin bandits. For those who are unfamiliar, skin bandits are horrifying. Essentially, they're skeletons who kidnap humans, peel their skin off, Silence of the Lambs style, and then wear that skin to try and convince everyone else that they too are human. It's some fucked up shit. And not wanting to bitch out of a fight, Shaft charged in, assisting the trade caravan in their fight against the skin bandits. The battle was short, however, and fairly one-sided, as the skin bandits massacred the trade caravan, kidnapping several of the traders before running off over the hill. Surely nothing bad will happen to those poor traders, right? We don't have time to worry about them at the moment though. For now, it's back to focusing on the camp. Shaft used some of the materials to build a small shack where he placed a research bench. Using that bench, I queued up a ton of research for things like farming, makeshift walls, general storage, and cooking. And when it comes to cooking, my plan is simple. Make dust witches. You can make these sandwiches by combining bread and cacti. Obviously, before we do that though, we need to grow those crops. And before we grow those crops, we need to research those crops. But wait, there's more. If we're going to research those crops, we need to bring 2 of each of those to the research bench first. Which is an incredibly long-winded way of me saying, I sent Shaft to a holy mine in order to steal cacti and wheat straw. Oh god, a shopping assault on Hot Topic? Quick, someone tell the goths and emos with parental issues. Anyway, while they burned down the Hot Topic, Shaft snuck into the Holy Farm, knocked out a ton of farmers, stole 2 wheat straw, and began making his way back home. We'll eventually need to come back and steal more in order to plant said garden, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Hi, post-recorded TGP here. None of this matters at all. I never plant any of the gardens. Alright, just thought you should know. Back to the video. While Shaft made his way back, Cat was attacked by a group of lost hivers seeking revenge for the queen. While Cat wasn't able to hold his own against them, he did manage to buy enough time for Shaft to return to the camp and kill the hivers. With the enemy dealt with, I added wheat straw farming to the research queue before heading down to Mourn in search of some cacti. Mourn is an interesting place. There were some large-scale rumors of an ancient warrior, a legend of the past, someone lost to time, having resurfaced in the remains of Mourn. But there was never any conclusive evidence, so no real merit was ever put into it. Aside from the rumors surrounding the city, you'll find it occupied by outcasts, former slaves, drug peddlers, tech hunters, and a strange beast taking up residence in an abandoned HQ building overlooking the ruins. All things considered though, I was able to find one singular cactus in the bar, only to walk out and find the entire city erupting in chaos. While the tech hunters really hate Shaft, one skeleton seemed to want nothing to do with him. As the tech hunters threw themselves onto Shaft's scythe, the skeleton walked off without looking back. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever seen a tech hunter walking around with ancient armor. A strange notion, but there's no time to read into that. We've got to worry about surviving.
It's real.
Following the events of Mourn, Shaft couldn't get the strange warrior out of his head. He knew he'd seen him before, he just couldn't remember where. One thing was for certain though, we'd have to go back. On his second attempt to re-enter the city, the exact same thing happened again. All of the tech hunters and occupants of the city immediately turned hostile towards Shaft. Except for the odd skeleton. It became apparent that the only way to obtain this warrior's attention would be to eliminate most of the citizens of Mourn, leaving him no other choice. Now, after slaughtering over a dozen men, a wounded Shaft found himself face to face with the mysterious warrior. The two drew their weapons, beginning a small skirmish that left Shaft bleeding out in the sand. Now, luckily for Shaft, all of the corpses piling up in the streets left several sleeping mats open around the city. In their second round, Shaft managed to land a few shots on the warrior, but was still easily outclassed in combat. While our hero struggled to regain consciousness, the mysterious warrior went on a little spree of his own, taking out several ninjas before walking away casually yet again. The following day, Shaft recruited Cat to head into Mourn with him, giving up the famed spring bat in the process. Shaft would engage the warrior in melee combat, while Cat positioned behind them and fired bolts into the warrior's weak points. The only problem with that is the warrior didn't seem to have any weak points. Well, that, and Cat had, to this point, never fired a crossbow before. The battle lasted literally the entire day, spanning several engagements, each of which left Shaft coughing up blood in the sand. It wasn't until our hero picked up the bow and planted a bolt in the robot's head that the mysterious warrior's true identity would be revealed. The legends and rumors were true. Girth lives on. After caging the hero, Shaft and him reconciled, and realizing that Shaft was currently undergoing something that Girth had already lived through and survived to tell the tale of, Girth agreed to join the team. So, you want to see them fighting side by side? Yeah, me too. Let's do it. Together, the dynamic duo known as Girthy Shaft could accomplish some incredible feats together. Before we do any crazy boss fights, we need better gear for Shaft. The place to find better weaponry would be in the Deadlands. Sure, they may hate Shaft, but who cares when you have Girth? I do love how Girth and Shaft have this interaction, almost like they're longtime friends catching up. They talk about how they were expecting more chaos once the Emperor fell, but how it was rather anticlimactic, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. The entire collapse feels like it's contained within the Great Desert. You don't really see any ripple effect outside of that. There's also a whole side conversation where Girth basically just admits that he's incredibly depressed. Same, bro. Same. Anyway, onto the scrap house. It's heavily guarded with highly skilled skeleton warriors, making it a fantastic place to see how the pair fight together against enemies who can, actually hit back. In reality, Girth kited around the guards, keeping them occupied, while Shaft snuck in and hunted through all of the gear in search of a better weapon. While I didn't manage to find another scythe, I did find a stronger polearm that'll be a great swap, so goodbye scythe. I did let them try to fight together, but the duo were easily overwhelmed, so I had Girth pick up Shaft and dip out. We could have gone back to camp in the south, but remember, we still need an armor upgrade too. And what better place to hit up than the drowned ruins I'd visited almost 2 months ago, all the way back at the beginning of the video. I told you I'd be back. But first, it's over to Burns Tower for a quick recharge. Upon reaching the armory, the duo tried to strut on in and take control of the building, only to be immediately beaten into unconsciousness and tossed in the water outside. When looking a bit closer, it's very clear why all this happened. All of the guards have an attack skill level of 104, with 90 strength, 90 toughness, and 99 dexterity. Even trying to do something menial like picking a lock is an almost certainty for death. Luckily, there's a series of beds upstairs, and the guards don't seem too worried about either Girth or Shaft until they commit a crime, meaning we can continue to rest up here as long as we need. Now, here's where some more of that fantastic Kenshi cheese and exploits come in. As long as you're not within someone's line of sight, you can pick locks on some of the chests and containers from the other side of walls, meaning we can actually steal some high quality gear, such as specialist grade samurai armor, giving massive defensive boosts across the board. With Shaft sufficiently geared up, the two would face their first challenge together, defeating the monster that left Mourn in ruin, the Great White Gorillo. An unstoppable beast with 109 attack, 102 strength, 120 dexterity, and 105 toughness. It's a goddamn Hulk, and it's trapped in the abandoned HQ building. The battle was fierce. The beast was just so damn tanky that it didn't matter how many hits you landed, the thing just kept standing back up. At one point, two ninjas strolled on into the building, and I thought maybe the citizens of Mourn were coming to help, only for the two ninjas to attack Shaft. And suddenly, I didn't much care for rescuing all of these people. After the Great White Gorillo was executed, we looted its pelt and paraded the body through the city ruins of Mourn, before leaving it in the center and heading back to camp. With the Great White Gorillo eliminated, it was time to take on another foe. Another legendary character who took Shaft's legs in the form of repayment, opting to feed them to his pets. The man who co-orchestrated the entire plot for poor Shaft. The Bugmaster. If the Great Desert was hell, I don't know what you want to call this place. It's covered in spiders, and as an arachnophobe, fuck everything about it. Everything about this part of the map makes me squirm in my chair. I hate it. Yet here we are. Luckily, our two heroes are strong enough to take on the spiders with relative ease, provided they don't get absolutely swarmed by 30 of them. Side by side, Girth and Shaft fought their way up the winding path, all the way into the tower, eventually securing the ground floor. In the distance though, a group of bounty hunters, eager to capture the Bugmaster, were being torn apart by a group of skin spiders out on patrol, showing just how absolutely merciless this place truly is. One wrong move here, and there's no coming back. Equipped with that knowledge, Girth and Shaft climbed the staircase and stood just feet away from their target. Since Shaft had been injured in the fighting, they thought it best to hide out on the third floor and recover, not thinking that an entire separate detachment of skin spiders would make their way up to reinforce the Bugmaster. With the fight underway, it seemed like an even match. Even with Shaft getting knocked unconscious, he was able to eventually get back up onto his feet and work in tandem with Girth to take out the bastard. In the Bugmaster's chest, they found a strange map, but that could be examined later. For now, they were only concerned with escaping. They could take on the Bugmaster again in a safer location that didn't involve 100 skin spiders waiting to tear them apart. And that's exactly what they did. After chopping off one of the Bugmaster's legs and putting him into a coma, Shaft and Girth sat together on a hilltop overlooking the sunset, where they finally executed the man, leaving his body to be devoured by whatever monstrosities roamed through the area. With the Bugmaster defeated, Shaft's journey was nearly complete. He owed but one debt of gratitude to his friend Girth, and the Bugmaster's map held the clues to uncovering how to repay that debt. You see, deep in the Ashlands lies an ominous place, and within that ominous place, one might find the mighty Cat-Lon, hiding in exile. Why was he in exile? Well, because he was the man who'd gotten Girth infatuated with NFTs all that time ago. Just like the Bugmaster was for Shaft, Cat-Lon was the sole reason for Girth's predicament. As repayment for helping Shaft enact revenge on the Bugmaster, Shaft would see to it that Cat-Lon would ultimately be caught and destroyed for his friend and mentor. So, under the gaze of a starry night, Shaft and Girth began their journey across the world to find and kill their final enemy. This journey would quite literally take them from one corner of the world to the other, and would span several days. The duo even reunited with Cat and traveled together as a pack to the Ashlands, arriving after a 3-day trek. The Ashlands are devoid of all life. There is no sensible reason anyone should venture out here. This isn't snow, as the name would suggest. The lands are covered in skeleton legion patrols, all with the sense to kill on sight. As the gang approached the ominous place, they walked into a massive facility covered head to toe in skeletons. Assuming this was Cat-Lon's new army, the trio got to work fighting through them. All 3 members sustained injuries, but the first battle was won. Even after killing almost 50 drones, peeking inside revealed an entire second group waiting to attack. Cat-Lon was on the other side though, which means the only way to reach him is through his guards. Just look at the carnage. Cat had taken the worst beating of the group, but all 3 were housing fairly serious injuries. But let's face it, all 3 knew this was a one-way trip. Cat chose to take up guard just outside of the throne room, with his sole purpose being to defend the duo from any outside forces that would attempt to gain access to the throne room during the fight. It was obvious he wouldn't be able to stop them all, but if he could just buy the duo enough time, well, maybe they could accomplish their task. The trio said their goodbyes, turned around, and headed inside, leaving Cat alone against an army of skeletons. Girth stood alone, facing off against the mighty Cat-Lon. As soon as the fighting kicked off, however, Shaft entered the room in a surprise ambush. During the duel, a third group of skeletons was able to enter the chamber, which could only mean one thing. Cat was gone. Caught up in the shock, Shaft took a shot to the chest, caving it in and knocking him unconscious. Girth, however, continued to fight alone. Seeing his friend lying on the ground, he scooped him up and sprinted outside, allowing the fighting to spill out onto the hillside. Shaft, near mortally wounded, stood by his friend, focusing on the guards continuing to funnel out of the throne room. Together, the duo stood side by side and fought for their lives. After several hours of fighting, Shaft and Girth managed to gain the upper hand on the mighty Cat-Lon, causing him to reboot. Seizing the opportunity, Shaft took out Cat-Lon's CPU, effectively ending the life of the legendary figure. 2 torsos, 1 robot and 1 human, both with similar beginnings and similar endings. Both came from nothing, surviving the unforgiving world of Kenshi, vanquishing their enemies, and rising to unfathomable power. With all of their enemies destroyed, the duo shared one final sunset together before removing their limbs, becoming torsos yet again, and crawling off into the night, hunting for their next journey.